All right, I'm super excited because today I am joined by Rachel of Slowdive. I'm just kind of now having like a fangirl moment over here, which is kind of funny, but it's a super exciting day today, Rachel, and why is that?
Well, our album's just been released today, so everything's basically gone ballistic in my life, and yeah, it's one of those. Obviously, it doesn't come around that often, but it's everything is manic, but there's a lot of happy people around today, so that's good.
So what does that mean? Like, what do you mean by ballistic? Is it like notifications or just like the input? What does that mean to you, ballistic?
Yeah, well, it's just. I mean, for the last 2 months, I've been having to do a lot of interviews for this record anyway, and I guess a lot of them are now coming out today or like in the last couple of days. Obviously, all the album reviews are now kind of like being bombarded with tags on social media and stuff of album reviews and just tags generally, people that have got the record. And yeah, it just feels very, things are just zipping along really quickly
Yeah.
now.
Have you
All this prep has been going on since the end of January when we finished the record, and all this stuff's been going on behind the scenes. And today it's all kind of like coming out, and it's a lot all at once when you kind of been doing all this stuff, and then it's all just kind of there. You must get it with when you release new jewelry as well, when you have that release date.
I I do. And there's also, it's just like the date is in the calendar. So even if you're not, do you feel like, even if it doesn't feel like, I feel like sometimes you're just like, well, we have to will it into the universe. Like it's never like this idea of like, it's never going to be perfect because it just isn't. So it just is like the day's the day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a
Yeah.
point where you have to let things go, and yeah, yeah.
Do you have a favorite song from this album? Or, I mean, is that like picking children?
Yeah, it is. That's a really good analogy. Actually, it's a bit like picking children. There's I don't have like one particular favorite. Probably three favorites.
Mm-hmm.
So the opening track, Shanty, I really love, and that was the first song we heard in the studio that Neil had been working on. So that's a favourite. It's got like arpeggiator in it and stuff, so that's good. The last song on the record, The Slab, really love. It's very heavy and quite dark, and there's definitely a darkness to me, so it kind of fits me quite nicely.
Oh,
Oh, oh, there you are.
there we go.
And what was the other one? Chained to a Cloud. It's another sort of more electronic track. So I've got three, maybe three favourites.
Awesome. I know. I was like, I think it's always interesting, like this idea of people like picking favorites, or like, because they all have like different meanings for different reasons for everybody. So, yeah.
Exactly.
So, while I was preparing for this interview and kind of just like doing, so we met at a concert, Shaky Knees in Atlanta, but it was interesting because when I was kind of preparing for this interview, there's actually not a bunch about you of like kind of like who you were as a kid or anything like that, at least not in my deep dive that I could find on the internet. And I feel like what our childhoods are so formative to who we become as adults. So can you tell me, who was Rachel as a kid? Like what was your life like growing up and everything?
Well, I grew up in a small village. I was born in England, but my parents moved to Wales when I was a baby, to a small coal mining village. And this was like, 1971, so a long time ago now. And I loved living in Wales. We lived in a little bungalow, and it backed onto farmland, and it was at the top of the village. Um, so nature has followed me in that sense throughout my life. It's where it's my happy place. And my parents decided to move back to England when I was about 7, which I was very distraught about. And we moved to another village, but I had a very thick Welsh accent, so I didn't fit in. Even at that age at school, I did not fit in, and I actually did get bullied at primary school, and I got a little bit bullied at secondary school as well, um, just for being different, really. So I was a bit of a loner, if I'm
Yeah.
honest. I had like a handful of friends, but you know how like fickle friends can be when you're a kid, and you know,
Hmm.
one day somebody's your friend, the next day they've decided they're not your friend. So you used to have to deal with that sort of stuff a little bit, which was like, quite sad looking back on it. But I met Neil from Slowdive in secondary school. We grew up in the same village, and we were in a biology class together, and I had the Smiths written on my exercise book, and he spotted that and was like, that girl is like, we like the same things. And there really weren't that many people in our village that were different. I mean, Neil was kind of more indie, but you know, I grew up in a house full of music. My parents loved folk music and jazz, and they met when they were 21, and my dad played banjo in a jazz band, and he played at my mum's flatmate's 21st birthday in their house. So that's how my mum met him. And I think they got married within about 6 months. So, you know, all of that. And then they used to go to folk clubs and stuff. And my dad taught me how to play basic chords on guitar when I was around 7. And all I ever loved really growing up was music. That's where I found my my solace and my peace, I think. Um, and I started learning classical guitar at around that age, 7 through to about 12. Did a bit of theory of music, then went on to the piano for a couple of years just to learn how to read the bass clef in music. And then I got bored with that, and I'm like, bored with all of that. Then I bought my first electric guitar when I was 13, second hand with my paper round money. And my dad took me to, you know, to go and buy it, a little amp, little guitar, and then all I ever wanted to do was be in a band and sing. And that was great, and I was fully encouraged by my parents to do it. But when I left school, my dad particularly started getting a little bit nervous about the fact I had no career path mapped out, and I didn't want to go to university. I didn't like school. I didn't
Hmm.
feel particularly supported at school. I loved doing art and English. Those were the only subjects I liked, really. And yeah, I kind of got forced into getting a job no, I got forced into going to college for a year post school, but I ended up bunking off most of that year, not going to my lessons because I met my first boyfriend there, and that was it. So off, you know, being a 17-year-old, experiencing life really. So
Do you
that's,
feel,
yeah, it's a succinct version of my childhood.
I know it's always like, let me boil down like a huge part of my formative years into this nice like package here. But I can definitely identify with that a lot personally, but I've been reflecting on a lot. Did you feel like you almost like, I think a lot of like creatives and entrepreneurs, when you don't fit in when you're young, do you feel like you had a little bit of this, like, I'm going to show everybody, like, I maybe don't fit in now, but I'm going to show you world that like, I'm going to do something powerful here. Did you have that a little bit?
I don't think I did, you know. I don't think I did. I think I was just I mean, I guess I always projected that out privately, like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, stand in front of a mirror and sing along to my favourite Susie and the Banshee songs, imagining there was an audience. I kind of projected it out, I suppose, in some ways, but not really publicly to other people. I was quite shy as well, so I didn't. But what about you? Did you?
You know, it's interesting. Like, I don't think I did, but through a lot of like therapy and coaching now, I 100% have realized. And now I'm getting really okay with it. Like, I'm just being like, I'm happy with me, but it was, yeah, I 100% didn't fit in. So, and it was from a super small town. Like, our graduating class size was like 80 people. And I didn't fit in. And so that's why I think I like wanted to make this jewelry brand that is a bit more like fringe and off brand for all of the people that didn't like, my jewelry isn't like for the like, you know, yeah, like that kid table or whatever, you know. So I always like to say like, I have a lunch table that everybody can sit at if you want to sit at it, but this is like my jewelry and everything like that. So yeah, this is me. But yeah.
Right.
So that's super fun. So you kind of mentioned that was like the start of how Slowdive started to get formed then. Like how did the other band members join in? Was it more people writing Smith's things on notebooks and you were like, oh, I like this person too?
Well, we actually had like a youth wing in our school, which where we could go on weekends to do, I don't know, like hobby activities, and there was a PA system there. Um, and by the time I was 15, I was also having keyboard lessons in a music shop, which I also got very bored with very quickly. And I said to a friend of mine called Alison, like, oh, let's start a band. Let's start a band. And I can't remember what. I don't think Alison even played an instrument, but she kind of went along with me and was, oh yeah, all right then. And so we went to the youth wing one Saturday or Sunday. I can't remember the day. Um, and Neil was there, and he used to help the youth leader out. And we asked him to set the PA up for us so we could plug in. And there were some other people in that club that also played instruments, but weren't necessarily, other than the fact they played an instrument, there wasn't really anything else in common with them. But the kids that were there, we all just kind of plugged in instruments and just sort of jammed around a bit, really, that first week. And the second week, I went to call for my friend to go back, and she was like, I don't want to be in a band anymore. Just don't want to do it. I was like, oh, okay. Well, I'm still going to go.
Yeah.
Little keyboard under my arm, trotted off to the school, and Neil was there again, and he'd already set the PA up, and he'd brought his guitar, and it was never a discussion. It just kind of was like an assumed thing from that point that we just started playing together. And our first first drummer, Adrian, was in our year at school, so that was fine. And he actually left the band just before we released our first EP, because he wanted to go to university. He was like, I need to go and get a degree. I was like, fair enough. Whereas the rest of us were like, woo, get records out.
Yeah.
And Adrian introduced us to Nick, our bass player, who was at a different school. And I instantly got on really well with Nick because he was a fellow goth like me. So, we definitely kind of bonded over our love of the same bands. And like with Neil was a lot more sort of indie, as was Adrian. And we had some like bands in common that we all liked, like the Jesus and Mary chain and My Bloody Valentine and things like that. And we advertised for a second guitarist, and we wanted a female. And Christian was literally the only person that replied to that advert and said at that time, remember back, this was like 1988 probably, he was like, I will wear a dress if I have to. Because by that point, we'd been doing a few little gigs around Reading. Anyway, as a four-piece. Doing quite a lot of covers and some original music. So he'd seen us around and was like, oh, they're quite interesting. They like the same bands as me. And that was it. And that's how Slowdive formed, really. So it was, over, I don't even know how long it took us to get to that lineup. A year, maybe 18 months to get everybody in place, and then for it all to start really making sense.
That's so fun. So pretty much then you all have been like on and off touring then for almost then 25, 30 years then pretty much. Right?
Well, the first incarnation of Slowdive ran from 88, 89 and finished in 95.
Mm-hmm.
We split up then after our third album came out. Neil and I went on to do a different band called Mojave 3 for 10 years and released 5 albums with that. Then I took a bit of a hiatus and had my son. So I was out of the industry for about 4 or 5 years, and then we regrouped in 2014, and now we're nearly 10 years later and we're still here. So we've existed in our second carnation now longer than the first time. it's kind of
Is the Was there a reason why you all like decided like let's give this another go? Was there just kind of
yeah. I mean, we got offered a festival date with Primavera in Barcelona.
Mhm.
In 2013, they offered it to us for the following year, and Neil contacted me about that. And I, at that point, I'd been a stay-at-home mum for 3 years, and it just came at a time where he was like, Slowdive have got pretty popular in our absence, and it's kind of a bit of a weird thing. I was like, all right then, okay. And we met up with Nick and Christian, and Neil was doing like some solo gigs, and I went and sang a couple of older songs with him on that. Nick and Christian came to that, and we were all just like, yeah, it could be fun. And then we got in touch with Simon, our drummer. Simon was our third drummer. We've had four in total. Simon was third drummer, but he was been was in Slowdive for the longest and is on most of the records, apart from the first EP and the last album. But and then he was up for it as well. And then it was kind of like, well, yeah, let's give it a go. And I think we didn't have huge expectations. We thought we'd probably do a few festivals, just see how it went, if we enjoyed it, and then it just really snowballed into something way beyond we could have imagined, basically.
That's pretty fun.
Yeah.
So from all of that, that's like a substantial amount of touring in your life, which takes a like it's a good part of if you're like equating like the amount of like I think they say like sleep is like 30% of your life. Like I would say like touring maybe is like another like 30% of your life. Do
Definitely.
you have like one or two moments that you're just like this was the coolest thing, like the ultimate high?
That Primavera show in Barcelona was up there without a doubt. I mean, there was about we played just as the sun went down, so we had a really good slot, and our manager made us get a backdrop for the stage with our name on, which we all laughed at. We're like, why do we need a backdrop? We've never had a backdrop. I mean, we could have rarely ever even afford to have a lighting guy on tour back in the
Yeah.
90s, and he was like, you need the backdrop so people know when it's on YouTube who the band is. And we're like, oh, okay, fair enough, good point. And we're waiting to go on stage, and that backdrop came down. There's about 20,000 people there. The audience, reaction was just off the scale, and when we all just kind of looked at each other and went, oh, okay. And it was a real shock. It was a real shock, and I just remember this sea of people that I'd never had to deal with before on that scale. All the cameras of them, filming it, and the screen, sorry, the screens either side of the stage, and I didn't stop shaking throughout the whole gig. It was like exhilarating and terrifying at the same time.
I
So
can
yeah, that was like the first moment, and I think the second one was when we released our first new single, Star Roving, in 2017, and put that out. And just the reaction to that, was brilliant and just very heartwarming to do.
That's super fun. Do you, on the flip side, have like one of like the low moments where you're like, oh my God, like what have I done with like my life?
I like,
Like, yeah.
I think probably towards the end of Slowdive Act One in the 90s, we struggled in the UK, particularly with journalists hating us. Really, they were all onto Britpop, and we got
Mm,
really quite uh, criticised in the UK press. A lot of it was very unkind, and the last London show we did, there weren't even that many people that came, maybe 200 people, and during the last song, our guitarist Christian always says he remembers like a woman at the bar, like at the back near the bar, just sweeping the floor, because there weren't any people there. And then it was kind of like at that point, it's like that's when I knew we kind of, we'd done our time, that time to quit. And yeah, that was obviously a low point. Um, but it was it was circumstantial, really. Everything was beyond our control, and I think the same applies now. I mean, Slowdive has a life of its own, and the ownership of the band really is on the fans.
Mm-hmm.
It's thanks to them that we're still here, really doing it and going out, being able to tour and play at festivals and stuff. Brilliant.
That's wild. I think it's, yeah, it's so interesting how like your career really has had these I mean it's like a roller coaster a little bit.
Oh, totally. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
I didn't think I'd still be doing it at this age, put it that way. So, it's quite a strange thing to be. It's a strange and wonderful thing to still be here talking about it
do
today.
you feel like since you've had this roller coaster, do you have a different perspective on it now than you did when you were in your 20s doing it?
Definitely, I appreciate it much more now than I did then. Yeah, I think I just appreciate it more, and I don't take anything for granted. I think when you're in your teens, early 20s, everything just kind of flies by, and you're having your drinks and enjoying yourself. Everything's a party, and well, most things. And now um, I think we're a lot more conscientious as a band,
Mm-hmm.
whereas before we may have, like, you know, gone and done a gig, maybe not 100% with it. Maybe had a bit of a smoke before we played, or whatever. Been a bit of a disaster, and yeah, now none of that happens. We're just a lot more conscientious and aware of what our music, does for people. And what else can I say? I think that's, yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
think that's fun. I'm gonna kind of make us do like a little sharp turn here a little bit and talk about kind of the collection, but one of the aspects of the collection that I think is really interesting is, and it's actually interesting, on a recent interview you talked about it, but like definitely you had said like I'm the only goth person in my small town right now, and we definitely have like it definitely, I think both you and I identifying as goth kids growing up, when we kind of collaborated on this collection, it was very much so like let's throw in some skulls, and it was definitely like macabre, like quote unquote, but part of the collection is actually based off of like this idea of mourning jewelry. Can you kind of talk about why that was so important to you to kind of have this little aspect of the mourning jewelry in the collection?
Yeah. Well, my mother passed away in 2020, um, and that was I suppose the closest loss I've ever had in my life, and it obviously had a huge impact on me, and has been very difficult to deal with. But I think through dealing with that grief and my well-known love of jewelry, I started to really just look at a lot of mourning jewelry online, and kept going kind of back to the Victorian era of mourning jewelry, particularly because it was quite fascinating how the Victorians used to grieve. Quite macabre with the photographs with people that passed away in them. Wouldn't go that far, but um, but the idea of the lockets, particularly I love, and I think it just really stemmed from that. I just wanted to do something that was like a modern take on um, mourning jewelry, kind of based loosely around the Victorian era of it, and to have the two lockets in the collection is lovely because obviously you can put things in them as well.
Yeah, that was the fun part about like doing the research for this, was like in the Victorian era it was very like a public display of when you were mourning. Like you
Yeah,
would wear different clothes and your jewelry, and it would kind of signify your stages of grief. And
yeah,
it's interesting now in society, it's such a like private affair. Like, you used to have like parlor rooms,
mm,
because death would happen and, and people would have it in their house. And now it's just such removed thing. So I think that's like one of the things I love about this collection too, is the aspect of like bringing that, like your locket, and it is still like you could put the photo inside of there or like a lock of hair or whatever, but it is still like I think it's a bit more of like that public display, and it more so being like I have grief and I'm moving along with it, but there's also such love with it too. I think it's just that kind of aspect of like grief and love are so intertwined. And I think that's like the beautiful, I think that's like the, it's so interesting when it's like you're a goth person where like it's all like you more it's like it's this romance with it versus this like oh my god it's so like grotesque or out there or something like that. It's actually this quite like romantic
Oh
aspect of
yeah,
it.
absolutely. I think it's to be embraced and, well, embraced. I guess you don't have a choice when you're grieving. You get thrown into that, and I think it's important also to talk about grief and acknowledge it, and, as you say, not hide it away. Um, and I think, unless you've been through it and lost somebody close to you, like any situation, it's impossible to really understand it. But then once you're in it, um, it certainly makes you look at the world in a very different way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it made me think about, my mum when she lost her mum. I mean, that wasn't, it was probably 20 years ago, and I had a very close relationship with my grandmother as well, and the impact that I had on my mum at the time. And now I'm the last female in my family, so that's also a kind of a strange place to be as well. Um, but yeah, I just think it's important to acknowledge grief and not shy away from it. So plenty of other cultures do um, do the public celebrations with Mexico and the Day of the Dead, and I kind of think those skull earrings it's a slight nod to that as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've been, fascinated by um, Day of the Dead celebrations probably for about 15 years now, and I love the way um, loved ones are honoured in that way. I think it's a very beautiful thing.
Yeah, I agree. I went to Mexico City once actually during the Day of the Dead
Oh, I'm
celebrations
so
just to see it.
jealous. I'm desperate
It's
to get out there for it one year.
you got to do it. It's also Mexico City is this just lovely city. It's for the US, it's like people always go to like the vacation hubs and everything like that, a little bit like how it's there with Spain and everything. And I just feel like I'm like Mexico City is like I'm like y'all are doing it wrong. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's truly
I've actually been to Mexico City once, but not during those celebrations. But yeah,
yeah.
I've,
Are you when you kind of like what words? What are words? I don't even know, Rachel. But I think it's like, are you happy to have kind of seen like the like when Slowdive kind of had that, like rebirth, so to speak, a little bit, and like your mom was there part of that journey? Were you excited for her to kind of see it become something again, or was she always just like, I love you no matter what? I
oh,
mean, mom's always.
she was always a champion of the band, and her and my dad used to come to gigs wherever they could really, and they came to did a festival in Portugal, and they came to that, and they would just try and pop to shows. Yeah, wherever they could. They did a lot of travelling when they retired as well, which was really nice. And the last gig she came to, she was in a wheelchair. Um, but that was at the end of 2018, and that was when we played with War on Drugs at Wembley. So, um, and she was a bit like, these wheelchair platforms are terrible because it's just like vibrating like this. And it was just like really uncomfortable for her, bless her, because she had back problems as well by then.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, she loved the band, and they always used to come to gigs. Got pictures of when we were 19, 20, and there's photos with my mum and dad in the audience. So always there, which was really lovely. And we dedicated this album to her and to Simon's father, who also passed away in 2020. We both lost a parent within a couple of months of each other. So both parents, were important in our musical journeys. So
Is that a little bit like of because that's also during like was that during when COVID like was in its full?
Yeah, it was in like the first like April and June when it first kicked
Mm.
off. Yeah, early
Yeah.
on, early on.
So is your album, does it kind of, is that part of like, since you are like the songwriter of the music and everything like that, did that have a big influence in like the album that is right now? Or,
I'm not the songwriter in Slowdive, so
oh, tell me,
go.
the internet totally led me astray. It was like singer and songwriter.
Oh, no. I mean, I've written songs and I've co-written songs along the way, but this album was written by Neil, who is the other
Mm,
singer in the band. He wrote and produced it. Um, so I would say that those, you know, the parents passing didn't have a huge impact on this record. Um, but Neil knew my mum from when he was a kid.
yeah.
Came to the funeral. Actually, one of the few people that came because it was limited amounts of people that
Mhm.
were allowed during COVID. Um, so yeah, I wouldn't say it directly affected the record, but it felt right that it should be in loving memory of both the parents.
No, I love that. I love that. They do. I tell you, childhoods and parents, it just kind of forms you to who you become. So, which
Yeah,
I obviously makes sense, but yeah.
yeah,
Well, awesome. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for taking the time today to just talk to me and really kind of help me understand even more who you are as a human. I think that's just like the really beautiful thing of life is we're just all such unique humans that have really great lived experiences, and designing this collection with you was so much fun. And I cannot wait to see you when you come to St. Paul in October. So yeah,
it'll be great.
yeah.
How far have
So
we 9 years
I
since we
know.
first met? When 9 years, 8 years since we first met. I can't remember now, but it's
Yeah.
a while.
It is, yeah, it's wild. Life is wild. I mean, to the fact that we designed a jewelry collection together is just bizarre in my mind. So, yeah. But I
It's
love that. I just love that's how the world is, and that we can be sitting in completely different countries right now doing this. So,
yeah,
I love all of that.
yeah.
But
It's a
yeah,
beautiful thing.
yeah, it is. Well, thank you so much. I hope your record release day is everything and more. And yeah, and we'll see you in the future.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.